Hello, my name's Jenny Kimber. With me is Peter Lewis, and we're at St Peter's Church in Lampeter, Velfrey in Pembrokeshire. And we're here because behind us in this church is a stained glass window depicting the theme of the Transfiguration. The window was made by Clayton and Bell in 1862, and hopefully it will inspire us. Peter, do you want to set the scene about the Bible reading?
Certainly. There are three accounts of the Transfiguration in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark and Luke. And the story comes roughly at a halfway point in each of the three Gospels. And they all have their little take on it. Each one has got its own little bit of differences. But the one which we're going to take, because I believe it influenced the other two accounts, is the one from Mark. "6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves, and he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, 'Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah.' He didn't know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, 'This is my son, the beloved, listen to him.' Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus."
Peter, this story, it's in the three of the Gospels. It's not in John, but I guess John does almost refer to it.
John, I think, has a different take about how Jesus' glory was perceived. But these 3 synoptic Gospels are very like each other, but there are little subtle differences. I mean, the window we've got behind us, for example, follows Luke's account, because only Luke says that the 3, Peter, James and John, were actually sleeping, were woken for the Transfiguration. And there are lots of other little things, like, for example, Matthew says Jesus' face was shining, and the other 2 don't say that. Peter calls Jesus Rabbi, not Lord, and that suggests that Peter hasn't yet seen. He just sees Jesus as a teacher, whereas in the other Gospels to call Jesus Lord is, of course, to grant him a heavenly status and Messiah.
In our window, though, I noticed that Peter's actually got his eyes open, so
yes.
Maybe they were being a bit more charitable to Peter than
well, the other 2 are obviously seeing it. I think it's just the moment when they're about to wake and see these 2 figures.
And the significance, of course, of Moses and Elijah. I mean, one's a prophet and one's a lawgiver, and in a sense, Jesus has come as the fulfillment.
I think what the evangelists have done is they've given us a story which is full of symbols. It's a kind of collage. As you say, Moses holding the tablets of the law, and Elijah the prophets. It's how we call the Jewish scriptures the law and the prophets. But there are other things to it as well. The fact that it takes place on a mountain, which is traditionally in the Old Testament where people met God. Also the fact that there's a cloud, which, as in Mount Sinai, is a sign of God's presence. So what they're doing is they're filling us with all kinds of symbols, putting them together and hoping we'll come up with an interpretation of them.
We always tend to think of Jesus as the one being transfigured, but I mean, it seems to me that there is a view, and I think I warmed to it, that maybe that it was the disciples who were transfigured so that they could see his glory.
That's not what the Gospels say. And they use the Greek word metamorphothe is used, and that's only used of Jesus, and it's the same for our metamorphosis. I'm sure it had a big impact on the disciples. Obviously it did. It was a critical moment in their apprehension of Jesus, but they remained the same. It was Jesus who has changed. It's Jesus who is, that's what it's called, the Transfiguration. It's something which we have to recognise, and I've not mentioned so far, is, of course, there's an obvious connection with the story of the baptism of Jesus. At the baptism of Jesus, a voice from heaven says, "Jesus is son." That's to Jesus, and that's the start of Jesus' ministry in Galilee. Here the voice speaks to the disciples as well and says, "This is my son." As you say, the Galilean ministry of Jesus is ended, and we're now using this occurrence as a way of pointing everybody towards the last element of Jesus' life, the journey to Jerusalem and his suffering. And as you say, there's been this prediction of the sufferings of Christ, and now, as it were, there's this anticipation of the glory, the resurrection that will come.
So is that the lesson for us today? That there may be a mountaintop experience, but then we have to roll up our sleeves and get on with it, and it keeps us going.
Well, of course, that's Peter's remark, isn't it? Let's build 3 booths, let's keep the whole thing going. But of course they can't. They've got to go down the mountain, because in Mark's account, when they go down the mountain, there's the epileptic boy to be tended to and cured and healed. You can't, as it were, indulge yourself in the glory indefinitely. There's a suffering world to be engaged with.
And the words that they hear in the cloud, "This is my beloved son, listen to him." The listen is not just listen to him just this minute, it's keep listening, isn't it?
It's, the divine setting of approval and authority on Jesus.
But I think the word for listen implies you have to keep on listening.
I'm sure.
It's not just once and for all.
Look and listen.
We hear about the disciples being asleep, certainly in one of the accounts.
Yes.
And we hear that too in the passion narratives. They don't come out of it very well in some of these, but maybe that's encouraging because they're like us.
Yes, especially in Mark's Gospel, which is why some people think that Mark's was the first to be written. I mean, at least the disciples in the account of the Transfiguration in Matthew and in Luke call Jesus Lord, which is one ahead of Peter, who's just giving him the very, very sort of ordinary designation, Rabbi.
I mean, the other thing that stands out is that here's Peter. He's had this tremendous mountaintop experience. And yet, at the end, he still wobbles, he still denies Christ. It gives the rest of us hope when we wobble.
Oh yes, I'm sure the apostles were never meant to be seen as perfect and consistent. And Peter is, of course, a byword for it. Think of all the times when he does something and then, can't see it through, jumping off the boat and sinking. It's all of a piece. And of course, many people think that Peter was intimately involved in the transmission of the tradition that formed Mark's Gospel. So maybe this is something, quite human, if that's true. Jenny, you've been very patient. You've been asking me for my opinion. Is there anything that you feel I've not mentioned, something that the story really says to you?
I think if I'm going to bring it right up to date for me, then I have picked up 1 or 2 things. I mean, one of the things that I've picked up is that we do need to listen. We need to be aware for that moment, that mountaintop moment, and we need to listen. Not just with ears, but with our whole being. We need to take in inside us. And then we have to remember that the hard work down in the valley, which is what the disciples were doing afterwards, we still have that mountaintop experience. I mean, that's what I take away, that you can't always have the nice bits, the mountaintop experience. You can't always have dessert. Sometimes you have to have bread and butter and you have to get on with it. And I think it does give me hope. And also the fact that Peter wobbled despite having had this wonderful experience, it gives me hope when I wobble too. That's what I do.
Traditionally, the Feast of Transfiguration was the 6th of August. And many people in those days used to contrast, after the Second World War, the cloud of the Transfiguration with the mushroom cloud at Hiroshima on the 6th of August 1945. It's the same date. Yeah. And I suppose, as you say, that's what we've got to do. We've got the cloud of glory, and we've also got the more sinister clouds every day.
Lovely thought.